they've done a lot of things. They did through a lot of people's efforts, Kimber Landing being one who was very, very involved in that. And the city, they reviewed a lot of best practices from across the country. They've put together better guidelines on how small-scale infill can be done. And there's kind of two camps in the infill world. There's the infill, new construction, which is what we are. Our project took an empty lot with nothing on it and then infilled the lot. Then there's adaptive reuse, which takes existing projects, old buildings or rundown buildings or something that's been abandoned or whatever, and then they fix those back up and bring them back up to code or whatever they do, and those are called adaptive reuse. So taking maybe an old house and turning it into a restaurant, or taking an old office building and turning it into new offices and a residence or whatever. So I'm a little more aware of and informed on the infill versus adaptive reuse. But the city has made adaptive reuse, I think, a lot more favorable. I don't know that much more about infill. The city owns most of the empty lots, the majority downtown, and so and I don't think they think small when they think about them. So I don't really know where the city really is on infill. I think they know they want to do it, they know they need it, but I don't know that they've really come up with a plan yet. But Carol certainly, the city's put a lot of hard work in the last planning process and all the village meetings and all that stuff. So
they really have. I've been to a few of them.
Yeah, it's hard. It's just a big giant rock to roll in a different direction.
It really is.
And especially when there's no people left in terms of staff, governments has no money, there's no development money, there's no way to support it. It's just really hard. Think it through, and you just have to kind of be relentlessly optimistic and relentlessly problem solving and try and do it all ahead of time. We did some things, we had very great success working with all of the people in the city, which a lot of people say, oh, the city must have been terrible. And I'm like, no, actually, they saved us in our building, but it's because we went to all the planning people first. We met with all of the inspectors and stuff that'd be reviewing our project before we broke ground, so they knew what we were doing and understood the idea, and we tried to do things to prevent confusion later. And then we also spent a lot of time with our architects, so we wouldn't change stuff while we were building. And the idea being is that this is so complicated and hard enough of a process anyway, even when everything goes right, that if you plan enough and you don't make changes once you've broken ground, then you're not making the city change the way it looks at the project, or saying, oops, inspector, we've got to do this now, and then they're like, well, we told you you couldn't, and then all of a sudden you have a conflict. And we had problems with our contractor on our project, and I have to say, I owe the success of finishing our project to the city employees. I mean, they saved us at the end when we got rid of our contractor. All those inspectors came out one at a time and walked the project with me personally and said, here's what you need to do, here's what is left, here's what they didn't say how to do it, but they knew the project and they were amazing. And I think that's testimony to the value of being engaged with the city before you break ground. We did our homework. We found solutions that the city had actually done and approved in neighboring properties that gave us creative ways to come back to objections by the city itself. So if they said, you have to change the way you do your parking, we're like, well, this structure that you own has this kind of parking, so can we have the same kind of thing that's good enough for you? If it's good enough for you, isn't it good enough for us? And we found all kinds of really interesting ways that the city had solved problems that we would have, and we showed them their solutions and said, can we apply the solutions you've already done to our project? And in almost every case, they said yes. I wish there was a greater number of smaller businesses that could find a way to do what we did. Some of this is like a message to the banking world. Hello, banking world, not everything is the same, and maybe they should learn to think in new ways. We couldn't find a single comparable project to do our financing on this. I mean, there are no small-scale, mixed-use new buildings. There just aren't. And so we were getting the weirdest comps. And so a bank needs to open up its blinders a little bit, that there's not just commercial, there's not just retail, there's not just tiny strip malls and not just houses. What things could coexist in a more interesting way. My other message is, so that's like a community message, is think in a more encompassing way. I have fantasies that someday the city will realize that Maybe they could do land deals on their lots with little people. So instead of trying to assemble a whole block and sell it to a developer, subdivide the block into 16 parcels and then do a leaseback option. So me as a landowner, or as a small entrepreneur, could come downtown and not have to buy the land. What if the city just owned the land and I got a 99-year lease? And I didn't have to pay land costs for 20 years. That would take 15-20% of my building costs out of my budget. And all of a sudden, these little projects could become financially feasible. So, why isn't the city thinking that way? All those kinds of things. I mean, the big projects get huge tax incentives. The little guys get bigger bills. So it's like, it seems to me criminal that after all the time and energy we put to turning a piece of garbage lot, my property taxes went up 1,000%. 1,000% when we finished. I'm thinking, and a giant project that's costing $1 billion has tax advantages. Now, come on, where is it for the little guy? So, message to the PCA and its constituents. Yeah, sometimes thinking small and thinking big at the same time could be really powerful.